the small and medium-sized enter in the market. Some attorneys, friends of mine, is no one in this room at this time, I think so, are working in some kind of foreclosure tactics. It's something like, I don't want to let anyone enter in this market. This is mine. So sometimes it happens that the bigger guy in the markets, the bigger market share, sometimes he's alone. He doesn't allow to enter to the markets. And unfortunately, sometimes he has no protection. Sometimes this plaintiff has no protection or has no substantial protection. It is the case of misuse. To end, finally, our council, our authority, antitrust authority, for a long period of time, just simply touch the issue intellectual property in the decisions, the normal decisions about merger, about vertical agreements, about horizontal agreements, but do not never ever touch the exercise of intellectual property, of IPR. And I can see now a new trend. It's the case of designs in the spare parts industry. After this, I don't want to say it is a foreclosure because I would like to not to prejudge this. But the small and medium-sized enterprise, just like in IBM 1956 consent decree, just like in the think about it and start to enter in the Brazilian Antitrust Authority. And it happened as it used to be. The first authority is the Secretary in the Ministry of Justice, said there is no intellectual property. We're talking about only the way it is acquired. If it is acquired legally, it is not void pro tanto, it is not a fraud issue. The problem is with the PTO. So I won't make any account about it. It used to happen. But at this moment, the consular named Carlos Ragazzo, in this case of the Association of Spare Parts versus Volkswagen, Fiat, and Ford, decided that this issue must be analyzed because the aftermarkets and the foremarkets are two markets in principle, and the authority can just close her eyes, or their eyes, the authorities, the two, because there is IPR. IPR is not exemption. IPR is pro-competitive in principle, but not exemption. And this is my message for today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was very enlightening, especially the topic of untested rights and maybe lack of expertise on the level of courts. And especially you also mentioned in particular utility patents. This is a form of protection which is very much advocated for emerging economies and developing countries, a system which might be used by small and medium-sized enterprises. But what happens if the big guys use the system as almost a weapon against the small guys? It's a system which is open to everybody, and this might also create problems. And this brings us almost naturally back to the topic of this conference in general, namely enforcement. Basically, we want to talk about enforcement, and strategic use of rights can take place in the face of enforcement. And here I would like to turn to Mireille, because you are a litigator, and I would like to know from you whether, from your experience, whether you have encountered such cases where maybe there was strategic use or strategic litigation, use of IP rights in order to make the life of smaller competitors more miserable.
Thank you, Joseph. We have heard this morning about the bright side of intellectual property. And I would like to say a few words about the dark side of IP in practice and describe very briefly two types of situation where IP is used to harm competitors. Very basic situation in order to trigger questions. The typical situation can be described as follows. A big player on a technological market is confronted with a newcomer, a SME or a startup, very innovative, very responsive towards clients' needs, with low overheads and low prices. What does it mean? The big player will lose market shares or will have to adapt its pricing. But there is another solution. Another solution if this big player has national patents or a European patent, even a weak one, even a bad one. This big player can just start court proceedings in several countries at the same time, claiming that the newcomer is infringing this weak European patent. And this will harm the competitor at 3 levels. It will hurt the SME financially. It will exhaust it financially because, as everyone knows, patent litigation is extremely expensive. It will also divert a great deal of time and energy from the management that will have to concentrate on litigating instead of concentrating on doing business. And it will also impact the startup's image on the market because, of course, if it is known that this company is sued for patent infringement, the clients will be reluctant to enter into a business relationship with this company. And in this regard, I will revert back to this in a few minutes. In this regard, you can use the pre-trial measures as organized by Article 7 of the Enforcement Directive. So it will hurt the image of the SME, it will hurt it financially, it will hurt the management. And of course, at the end of the day, the big player may lose the action because the patent is weak and because there is no infringement. But it will take years. You know, on average, it takes 5 years. If you look at the Benelux countries, except the Netherlands, but at the Benelux countries, or France, or Poland, or even Italy or Spain, it takes years to get a decision. So it is worth doing it because even if you lose, actually you've won, because you have exhausted your competitor, and if you're lucky, it will go bankrupt or you can take it over. Of course, there are some solutions. You have the patent litigation insurance, but it will only be part of the solution because it will not solve the image problem. It will not solve the fact that the management will have to deal with litigation. You have insurance through group membership, joint ventures, or you are M&A. But again, it will not solve the entire problem. The community patent could be, of course, a part of the solution because then you will have one patent and one proceeding. But again, the costs of litigating this community patent will remain rather high. And the question I would like to discuss here is whether competition law could be part of the solution too, although I know that competition authorities and courts in general are reluctant to consider that filing an infringement suit is an abuse, and even abuse of dominant position. This is very difficult. And that's a first situation. There is another situation where IP can be used to harm competitors. And this is the abuse of pre-trial measures as organized by Article 7 of the Enforcement Directive. As you know, Article 7 of the Enforcement Directive is based on the saisie contrefaçon, which exists in France since the French Revolution, in fact, and in Belgium since 1867. So it's an old system that has been taken over by the Enforcement Directive in Article 7. And as you know, it's an ex parte procedure. So Article 7 invites the member states to implement the saisie contrefaçon. So an ex parte proceeding whereby the IP right holder asks the court to appoint an expert or a bailiff to visit the premises of the alleged infringer, to describe the products or the processes, as well as the origin, scope and destination of the infringement. So that means that in practice, an expert trained by you as a plaintiff, so you train the expert will pay a visit to the infringer. The infringer is, of course, not informed at all. And of course, the defendant has not been heard by the court. So he is informed when the description takes place. And then the expert will describe in details the products and the processes allegedly infringing, and describe all the documents relating to this product or processes, draft a report, and hand the report to the plaintiff. So this is a fantastic tool for bona fide IP right holders who really believe that there is infringement over there. But it can also be a weapon, and it is used actually as a weapon to get access to trade secrets. And of course, the directive has tried to address this issue of protecting trade secrets, but it's very difficult. So the directive says that this proceeding is subject to protection of trade secrets. But what does it mean in practice? Because the case law considers, and this is actually a good thing, that the defendant cannot invoke confidentiality to block